Hello and welcome to the Takeaways podcast. On today's episode, we are talking about the Ndjaba Seed Fund by Bellatrix Investment Managers. Ndjaba Seed Fund is a fund which will be investing in startups in the Southern Africa region. To help to share more on the fund, I'll be talking to Jesaya Hano-Oshike, who is the MD at Bellatrix. Hi, good afternoon, Jesaya, and welcome to the podcast, man. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, FM. Thank you for having me. I'm good. It's a bit chilly these days in Namibia, but otherwise all good.
Great. So I want to jump straight into it, right? Please tell me more about the Ndjaba Fund and, what you guys will be trying to invest in and why you launched the fund particularly.
Okay. Ndjaba Seed Fund is basically a Southern African focused fund looking to fund early stage investments or startups in Southern Africa. The reason why it was founded was really looking at the funding ecosystem in Southern Africa. Most of the funds that come to Africa, which is basically about 1% of the total startup funding globally, goes into the big four markets, that's being, Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, and South Africa. And very little then trickles down to the rest of the countries. So the idea was then to really then create a fund that looks at early stage investments in the rest of the countries outside of South Africa, but we also do consider South Africa, but also focusing on the rest of particular SADC region. So that's why it was set up, because I do believe, given what I've seen, there's a lot of interesting businesses that really will deliver for investors if they're giving the right funding and support.
So now I want to dive into the fund itself, right? It's a 10-year fund. You're looking to invest in between 35 to 50 startups, right? In terms of the ticket size, you're looking at between like 100K to 350K, and I believe also there's 25K to 100K. Can you share more, one, in terms of the equity, how much are you trying to get from these particular companies? And then, in terms of the funding also, how do you decide to invest either like a 25K in a particular startup or 100K in a particular startup?
So the fund is divided into two types of funding structures, right? The first one is the pre-seed fund. With that, we're looking for early stage businesses that maybe have moved past the idea stage, have an MVP, maybe some users, but perhaps it's pre-revenue, or you just have, made a very little money. Then we kind of, invest in you between 25K to 150,000 USD. And then we really help you kind of, either get your first revenue or improve your revenue significantly. And that's really what we do there. Then the second portion, where about 70% of the fund will be deployed, is the seed funding. So this is for entrepreneurs that have generating revenue. Even if you're not profitable, but you have shown significant traction, then we come in, we invest into you, and also help you scale into other Southern African markets. Then the end goal is then to basically exit, to larger VCs, private equity, and so it goes. Maybe could be management buyouts, maybe limited IPOs, but that's how the fund is structured. And in terms of shareholding, the idea is to take minority shareholding, probably no more than 30% of equity in the business, but obviously it depends on the valuation and also funding needed in that particular business.
I want to start get the pre-seed startups. I mean, in terms of deal flow, though we don't have, a lack of problems to solve over here in the region, to be able to find startups which are trying to solve these problems at like a venture scale is so complex, right? How do you try to, how are you going to try to like attract deal flow?
Okay, so for that, in Namibia, we I already luckily help run an incubator called Basic Business Incubator. So they for the past about 3.5 years, we've worked with over 3,000 entrepreneurs. So there's some very good ones we were targeting to work with. Now, when you talk about other countries, it's a similar approach where we want to work with established, incubators and accelerators in those countries, particularly looking at, let's say, Botswana, Zambia, also South Africa as well, and so it goes. That's the kind of the way we are then gonna be, attracting quality deal flow into our fund. And then also post investment, we're going to work with those same incubators to help support those entrepreneurs, over the investment period.
In terms of the startups, I mean, it's a regional fund, so I'm assuming that like funders from like Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, etc., are going to be like applying for the particular fund. How is it going to work, like in terms of incubation and acceleration of the startup? Like, are you going to have some kind of like a program kind of format where like the startups, there's going to be like an in-person and a remote kind of? How is that going to work out?
I mean, when you apply, we have developed a platform called Mula Stream. So on that platform, startups can basically apply to be considered for funding, and then after which we will then assess them. There's also an AI mechanism on that as well to kind of just do some preliminary, assessment on the startup, what are their weaknesses, what are their strong points, all of that. That also helps in a due diligence process. But okay, then after funding, what we'll then do is we work with close to his experts on and basically after we've obviously done that assessment on entrepreneurs, what they actually need assistance with. But there are overarching areas, we're going to be working on, includes the operations, marketing and sales, finance, and all of that type of stuff. And then, but obviously then because every startup is unique, can be in fintech, can be, agriculture, value chain. Then we bring in an expert to kind of hold them. But over the period, the investment team as well, will work closely with the entrepreneur, follow their journey, and basically guide them and assist them where they can to really make sure that we help build that business for scale across Southern Africa.
In terms of investment, right, you already stated that you'll be like trying to invest like across like a wide range of sectors. Are you going to consider more of like like B2C startups, or are you trying to invest more like into the B2B startups? And then a follow-up question in terms of startups, right? Are you going to consider more of the market, or are you going to look more at the founding team, or are you going to focus on the product itself to see if it's going to scale?
So basically, when it comes to the industries or sectors we're going to be investing into, the fund is sector agnostic, but we do have certain sectors that we are going to be prioritizing. This includes fintech, healthcare, agriculture, value chains, cleantech, as well as technology platforms. Those are some of the priority sectors that we have in the fund. Now, we're not going to be looking at it a B2C or B2B. It's really we're looking at the investment case, and if there's a market for it, and also on top of that, obviously, before you invest, the team or the jockey is very, very important. We must be confident in the founding team that they will be able to pull this off, because it can be how great an idea, but if the team is not great, then even if we do give them support, the likelihood of success is not that great. So obviously it's a combination of the team, the market, the expertise within again that particular team, to be able to execute, and then on that basis we will then invest.
Before we jump to the growth stage startups, right, I want to understand this. I mean, over the last few years, when a lot of the VC has been coming into the continent, I think, like in terms of investments, a majority of them have been going to West Africa, and then to East Africa, and then to North Africa, and then to Southern Africa. And if we get our region, like a majority of the investment has been going to South Africa, right? What role do you think this particular fund is going to play in kind of like trying to put the rest of the region on the map with regards to VC?
I mean, the reason why the VC firms come to those countries in particular, and I mentioned Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, because they're very well-developed VC markets, ecosystems, and also there's also a huge population or market, right? That's why countries like Namibia and Botswana, we have small markets, right? And that's and also a limited deal flow as well, right? So that and on that basis, they wouldn't invest. But that's why we went to say, look, let's look at the whole Southern Africa as a whole. SADC is a 400 million population, and it's quite I think about $800 billion GDP. So that's a big market. And then the issue has always been, especially in the smaller market, or other markets outside of the big four. even if the markets are, somewhat larger, it's a lack of deal flow that they experience, right? So that's why we want to be on the ground and basically creating that deal flow for them, putting the work, working together with the incubators, cutting them initially small checks and holding their hands. And once they're ready, then we can make those introductions to the larger VC firms for investment. Because maybe we have the heart for this and they don't have the heart for this, but we want to put in the work and really build local startups.
In terms of the investment also, I mean, you stated on the press release that though like it's going to be mostly your stake, you're going to look to take like a little bit of the equity, you are also going to consider convertible debt and also like safes, right? How are you going to decide on this just so that like a founder who's trying to like apply to it can have like an idea of how they should go about it?
It's really going to be on a case-by-case basis, right? I think the most preferable funding option, at least for mine, maybe obviously it's not internationally how it works, but what I've seen, especially from Namibia ecosystem, is really straight up equity, because sometimes the enforceability of safes, it's not quite easy at times. So we really look at, so probably going to be looking at convertible debt as well as equity. And will be depending on the maturity of the business and such. So especially on debt, we probably convertible debt, we're probably going to be looking at the more mature businesses that have predictable cash flows already, and then we're just going to be using that to bridge certain gaps within the business. While equity will put, mostly for the pre-seed, we're probably looking at equity, and now and then a safe if really believes a great business, but we can really agree on valuation at that point in time. That we can consider, but that will be in limited circumstances. So that's why we've opened it up to those kind of products again. But at the end of the day, it's we're looking at equity first, but on other instruments, a case by case basis.
I want to speak now on the C stage of the investment strategy, right? The first question I have is that when you fund a startup at the C stage, you find that like in terms of the cap table, you have like a lot of like like your angel investors in there, and then perhaps you have like a couple of like your friends and family in there. In terms of you guys coming in, right, are you going to do this where like you try to clean up the cap table by like trying to offer like your secondary sales, etc.?
Not really. I mean, for me, the messy cap table has never been an issue. Obviously it's not ideal, but for me it's not really an issue as well. As long as there's an understanding, in terms of, the corporate governance within the organization, we're probably going to have set up a board. That board will then make decisions, and that board can comprise of some of your former investors as well as us, and so it goes. So that to me is not an issue in itself. And and the funds are not to buy out existing investors. The fund will be used to grow the business. So we will not come out and buy out existing investors. So that's really to build a business, and then because ourselves also want to exit after we build the business, and so that's really what the funds will be used for.
In terms of the growth trajectory, the fund is obviously going to try to back, like startups which are based in the region. Are you going to consider startups which are trying to grow to the region? Perhaps you have like a startup like in Kenya trying to expand to Botswana and Namibia and Zambia. Is that going to be a consideration?
Not at the moment. Right now, we want to basically look at entrepreneurs that or other startups that are based in one of the sider countries. And help them grow. I mean, but if one of the startups says, look, I want to partner with the Kenyan business, so we are able to scale within Southern Africa, then yes, we can do that. But the business must be initially domiciled within one of the sider countries or Southern African countries for us to consider them. But partnerships are always welcome.
If there's one challenge that the region has always had, like apart from the lack of the capital at the early stage, it's for investors who I spoke to over the years, is just the lack of the deal flow, right? So obviously this is quite like a significant fund over 10 years. Your thesis, right? How do you think it's going to change, especially if you look at the fact that like technologies are changing so fast? We have like the AI craze at the moment. We don't know what's going to be there like in the next 2 or 3 years. How are you going to help startups to be able to adjust to these changes as as technology companies?
I think, look, obviously we are not necessarily called tech experts, but what we have is a good network of tech experts that we can kind of tap into. So the idea is then to again handhold the entrepreneurs and work with experts, and part of the funding will go to funding experts to really help the business grow and build, because because we just don't see ourselves as only a provider of capital, but also a provider of that support to help you grow and build your business and also expand into the rest of the region.
As we close off our conversation, right, in terms of the future of the region, I mean, I've already stated that we have kind of trailed behind the rest of the continent, like in terms of the funding, though we do not have like a lack of problems to solve, through technology, right? From your POV as obviously like an expert in the ecosystem, how do you see, tech evolving in Southern Africa, and, what do we need to get right to be able to try to grow as much as we possibly can?
Yeah, I think again, I'm not necessarily a tech expert, but what at least what I'm seeing is that we should instead of just being followers, we should also try to be leaders in technology, or at least early adopters, and seeing how we can adapt it to our own evolving environment and ecosystems. As an example, I mean, we can talk about, let's say, the new tech evolution right now, which is artificial intelligence that has come. So, and that is, I believe that has a lot of opportunities. So, but what I haven't seen is significant technology solutions that have come out of South Africa using artificial intelligence. We are still obviously using what's coming out of the US, Europe, and Asia. So I think that's in general what Africa can do better, is just either the early adopters or leaders in technology, and that's what I hope to see come through as well. Maybe we'll see one or two good entrepreneurs that can bring that to the fore, in our investment portfolio.
Look, I would like to commend you and the team on the great work that you're going to do through the fund. As a person who has covered the region quite extensively, I think this fund is going to play an important role in like ensuring that innovative startups who are building some incredible products, right, have the funding to be able to scale all these products. And I wish you and the team all the best in terms of the deal flow, etc. And I really appreciate your time and you coming into the podcast to talk about the fund.
No, thank you, Ephraim, and thank you for having me. Really do appreciate it.
Cheers, brother.